to the Pro Bono Happy Hour. I'm Rena Glazer. Welcome back. Do you like listening to our show? We aim to inspire, teach, and sometimes entertain. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, could you please take a moment to subscribe and leave a review? It's quick and easy to do. You could just leave a rating or add some comments, whatever you'd like. We'd appreciate the feedback, and it would make it easier for other listeners to find the show, spreading the word about pro bono and access to justice. Thanks so much for your help. And if you prefer a different platform, the show is also available now on Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, and YouTube. Leave a review wherever you are listening. Today we're talking to Osvaldo Garcia from Cadwalader, Wickersham, and Taft. Osvaldo is based in New York City, where he is a member of the firm's private client group. He also maintains an active pro bono practice, and we discussed how he combines the two. We hope you enjoy the conversation. Osvaldo, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Let's jump right in. For starters, could you tell us about you? Share a little bit about yourself, your background, where you grew up, your family, where you went to school, things like that.
Okay, well, that's a lot to unpack. So I'm an attorney right now. I've been an attorney for the last 5 years. It's going to be 5 years, I think, in September, although sometimes it feels like dog years. It feels much longer than that. But I'm originally from Cuba. I was born in Cuba, and I lived there until I was 10. At the age of 10, me and my mother and brother, we were able to defect outside of the country. So, we took a circuitous route to the United States. Eventually, when we arrived in Miami, my mother sought political asylum. And so we had a process of kind of relocation and being adjusted to the United States. And eventually we were able to become citizens of the United States. So I was based in Miami for most of my teenage years. That's still where my family is. So Miami is kind of a second home now. I think, I finally feel comfortable calling New York my first home. And I went to undergrad in Miami, Florida International University. And I actually went there for international relations. So my thought was always that I would become, some sort of embassy worker. But eventually that didn't work out as planned. So I decided to shift gears, and I didn't want to take a year off. So I decided, I can always take the LSAT. And I did, and I did well on it. So, that decided to become a lawyer. So I ended up actually going to Cornell Law. And so I did my 3 years of law school there, and eventually found my way to Cadwalader, where I have been practicing since.
That's amazing. So, okay, tell me a little bit about the transition from Miami to Ithaca. Weather, at least, that is extreme.
It was definitely an adjustment. What nobody told me is that Ithaca was about as bad as it would get. So by the time I got to New York, I felt like I had it easy. But it was definitely an adjustment. And certainly what they call the spring semester over there at Cornell, it's certainly not the spring semester, because if it's still snowing by the time that you're taking your spring exams, then it's certainly not what you would call spring. So it was rough. It was very cold, a lot of, walking through the snow. I feel like now I can tell my kids, when I was your age, I could walk through the snow and, give all those war stories. But it was at the end of the day, it was a really good experience. I decided at the last semester that I wasn't going to go to another spring semester, and so I ended up just doing a semester abroad in Lisbon, and that was a really great experience. So I kind of still feel like my last semester I didn't go to law school, but I definitely got to learn a lot. I got to see the law from a different perspective, particularly now with my practice, since I'm much more internationally focused. It has really given me a lot of tools, to be able to, do the type of work that I am doing. So that was a really good experience. But no, certainly, in terms of weather, it was an adaptation, to say the least.
Well, weather aside, Cornell is a great school. It actually has a beautiful building. So
Yeah, and they actually expanded it recently. So now we have, many more classrooms, and I didn't get to see the fruits of that expansion because by the time that it was open, I was going to Lisbon actually. So it's, I go back there every, once in a while, every few years to do some recruiting, and I'm always amazed at how good of a job they've done with the campus. So I really have no complaints at all whatsoever. Plus a beautiful library, but then again, most of these universities have beautiful libraries, so it just kind of feels redundant.
Tell us a little more before we move on about spending the semester in Lisbon. I know, there's so many debates about the third year of law school and how to make it, sort of useful and vibrant, and is law school too long anyway, and how do we get people practice ready, or how do we give them interesting and meaningful experiences? So it sounds like a semester abroad is definitely an interesting and meaningful experience.
Yeah, I have thoughts about the third year of law school, but at the end of the day, I thought that it all depends on what you're looking for. I found that it worked for me because I really got to develop a network of international colleagues, and that really allowed me to convert it into kind of a web of people that I could tap into, depending upon which country I was dealing with. So, for example, one of the first tasks that I was given was to, deal with a passport issue for one of our clients, and I was in a former Portuguese colony, and so I was able to, use my resources, my friends, in order to get in contact with one of the law firms in that country. So, it really allowed me to obtain some resources that I wouldn't otherwise have, and also just make some fantastic friends in the process. And particularly, the matters of the EU, I got to learn a little bit more about how the EU works. And I think now more than ever, you kind of just need to have, a broader perspective. I think that U.S. practitioners, for the most part, tend to be very insular, and that's just kind of something general as a whole in the United States that, if it's happening outside of the U.S., you don't really care about that. But I think nowadays it's becoming more imperative that we know what's happening outside of the United States, and we know how, the systems of governance function in other countries. So I think with respect to that, I thought that it was very helpful. Of course, I mean, you could take out of it as much as you want. You could treat it as, time to just unwind a little bit. And certainly the caseload in a foreign country, at least in my experience with Lisbon, was not as bad as it was here in Cornell and law school here. I actually had some friends that eventually ended up going to Cornell for a semester abroad, and they were just shocked at the amount of work they had to do. It's just a different kind of mentality and a different kind of pedagogical approach to learning. Whereas here it's much more focused on reading the cases, outlining, making sure that you're very prepared. Over there is more as go to the class, hear a lecture, and then write a paper about it, which is definitely different. Not necessarily one is better than the other, but it's certainly a different teaching process.
So you mentioned that you went to law school and you ended up at a law firm. Tell us how you got to Cadwalader.
It's a fairly vanilla story. It's, you do OCI on-campus interviews your first summer. So the first summer after you've gone through the ringer and passed the gauntlet of your first year, then you're greeted with, now you have to interview and try to convince people that, that you're worth it. And, essentially I interviewed with Cadwalader, and funnily enough, the interviewer at the time, we actually kind of bonded over Lord of the Rings. So that's a funny little story. And so, eventually, we developed a good rapport, and so I got a call back. So it was actually the first law firm that I interviewed with. And, they gave me an offer to go back, as a summer associate. And it was either, here at Cadwalader or somewhere in Miami, to another law firm in Miami. And so it really came down to where do I want to live. And so ultimately I chose being here in New York. And, at first I kind of regretted that a little bit because I, found it a little bit hard to get accustomed to New York. Before this, I had not been in New York for more than 3 days. So, to go from that to just, okay, I'm going to move here, was a big change. But, eventually I warmed up to the city, and And so I started out as a litigation associate. I went through the summer associate program, got an offer to return. I was pretty much known as a litigation guy, so the litigation team took me in, and I ended up going to the litigation department, and I worked there for about a year and 3 months, and then I transitioned to the trust and estates group. So that's currently where I find myself. I'm a trust and estates attorney, dealing more on the international field because of my language, my background, etc. Yeah, that's what I've been doing.
Now, tell me about that transition. What attracted you to the trust and estates work?
So, first of all, I love litigation. I think litigation is, at the end of the day, one of my greatest passions, and one of the big reasons why I ended up going to law school. I kind of like the challenge and the gamesmanship of, being on one side and arguing for that side, etc. I think that appeals to a lot of lawyers. I think the problem was that the type of litigation that I was doing was not necessarily the type of litigation that I wanted to do. And during that time, I got to meet some of the principals in the trust and estates group. And so I got to work with them on a few matters, just interpreting and trying to help with, the Spanish, etc. And so I really liked, the fact that I could speak to actual people, that I could actually speak to actual clients. Being in a big law firm, a lot of the times you're dealing with, the legal departments of a large institution, etc. So, it was very personable for me to be able to have a direct line to the client and be able to talk with the client. So it was a feeling of, being able to help our clients, and being challenged on an everyday basis and dealing with whatever problems the client, may have at a particular point in time. And at the end of the day, I like the idea of being able to put on a lot of different hats every day. And, some days I'm doing some more litigation-oriented work. Other days I'm doing just traditional trust and estates work. Other days I'm doing some corporate-oriented work. So it really allows me to see the full spectrum of, different fields of law. And honestly, here at the firm, I've worked with every single group at this point. I get to really dip my toes into every single practice. It's not just the same, thing over and over again. So I think that really called out to me. And plus the fact that from a very early stage, all the principals treated me, as a full-blown attorney. And yes, I was learning, but they treated me with the sort of respect, that, comes with, being an attorney and having gone to law school, etc. So I felt like my opinion was valuable and it was actually desired. So not necessarily that that's not the case in other groups, but, I felt it much more here in the trust and estates group.
I was a litigator in my past life, and I think your experience really resonates with me. And I think the idea of focusing time on serving individuals as clients rather than sort of corporate entities, I think also speaks to pro bono, where a lot of people love to do pro bono work because it's a time where you get to help individuals, right? Which people may not get as part of their billing practice, which is a good transition because you maintain an active and actually award-winning pro bono caseload. What sparked your passion for pro bono and access to justice?
Well, like I said, I am an immigrant. I came here when I was 10, and I grew up in an immigrant environment, and I can see how so many people are kind of floundering without access to legal services. And so it's always been, to me, I see it as almost a responsibility or a duty that I have, to the community. And I actually tell this to other attorneys, every time I have to do a pitch, I'm much more of a forceful type of person, because I think that, we do have an obligation to our community to, provide and give back. It's not just about, the billable client and the client that can pay your fees. You should have a certain amount of hours dedicated to just giving back. And I think, as an immigrant, I feel like, that's what really makes me gravitate towards the kind of work that I do in pro bono, which is helping undocumented immigrants, which is that I do feel like, I got a very favorable reception here in this country simply because of my status as a Cuban, and for whatever political reasons, historical reasons, I had, a special privilege of staying here and being able to become a citizen through the Cuban Adjustment Act. But honestly, I certainly felt like my claim wasn't any greater than, for example, someone that comes from Salvador and is escaping violence, someone that comes from Guatemala and is escaping, domestic abuse. I felt like, if I had that opportunity, it should be my responsibility as well to provide that access to other people. And, particularly our immigration system is, to put it mildly, a mess. And it's just kind of a patchwork of different forms of relief without any kind of overarching method to it all. And so, for someone that, at times may even, not be able to read, to be able to go through that process without legal assistance, it's almost as if you're set up to fail. So, to be able to be in a position to help those individuals, really means a lot to me. And I try to tell attorneys that, it's not just something that you do because you feel like you should do it. It's something that I think is an obligation. So, I know that that's a very kind of forceful perspective on my part, but I really do feel that way. I feel that we as attorneys have that obligation.
Let's pick up on that. What do you say other than it's our duty, it's our obligation? What else is part of your pitch to busy law firm lawyers who don't think they have the time to get involved in pro bono?
Oh, I have a few arrows in my quiver that I use. I think the main one is, as I think you alluded to it before, is that you really are going to get a level of experience that, maybe you wouldn't otherwise get at an early stage in your career at a big law firm. And it really allows you to take ownership of the case. It really allows you to take ownership of developing the facts, getting to know the client. And I think a lot of the skills that you acquire, they do translate into a lot of the billable work that you do. So I think that's probably one of the biggest ones that I try to tell attorneys that, they should really take advantage of that. But beyond that, I try to let them know that, just by you dedicating a bit of time, and yes, some of the cases may be a little bit more time intensive than others, but let's just say that it's just, 1 to 2 hours, at the end of your workday, or even, taking up a little bit of work on a Saturday or a Sunday, depending upon, how, best you feel, you really can change the life of someone, and you really can just divert the path that they would otherwise have taken into something much more positive and give them opportunities that they wouldn't have otherwise received. And it's not just that person that you're changing their lives, you're also changing the lives of, all the, successive generations that come after, so their kids, their grandkids, etc. You're allowing them to really become, a member of the society. And so, the moment that you actually get to see them, your client who you have developed a bond with and a relationship with, the moment you get to see them finally succeed and they know that they can breathe, that they are finally free, I think that there are very few feelings that compare to that. I think it's, as an attorney, it gives you a sense of gratification. And, the other aspect that I talk about is a lot of the times attorneys, they're worried that, they have someone's life on their hands and, do I have enough experience? Do I have what it takes? Particularly transactional attorneys tend to be very shy, in that respect. And they ask me, do I need to go to court, etc. What I tell them is, look, you basically have an option of, cases that you can take on, and none of them are less important than the other. So if you don't want to go to court, we have certain types of cases that you can work on with respect to that. Or let's say that you do want this particular type of case, we can put you, in a team with someone that does want to go to court, etc. And you can basically take on as much or as little as you want, essentially. So we try to make it very modular so that they don't feel like they need to take on something that's beyond their capabilities. And beyond that, just give them the proper training and kind of demystify the process, tell them that, these are the steps you need to take, go to training sessions, these are the templates that you can use, so that it's very much plug and play. And, of course, there are always going to be things that, are unforeseen and that may come up, and those matters, we just kind of deal with them as they come up. But more than anything, I try to make it, so that they don't feel like they're going to be overwhelmed and without a lifeline. So those are a few of the things that I do. And of course, it's always hard. So a lot of times I just have to personally appeal to them and say, look, there's this case, and I send them the case, and, it's harrowing. The facts are terrible. And I say, we need someone, and if we don't have someone, then, this person may not be able to get the, assistance they need. So, that usually tends to be what works the most. At the end of the day, I'm not going to be able to reduce their billable caseloads. I can't do anything with respect to that. So more than anything, I just have to appeal to them, that this is something very positive for them. So I have had to develop that over time because, everyone that works in pro bono knows that the most difficult part is getting attorneys to divest their time to work on it. So it's always an ongoing process and one that we're always kind of revisiting.
Well, I think you've got a lot of, as you said, tools in your tool belt, and you've combined both the inspiration side with the anticipating people's challenges and how you overcome them. So I've heard that excuse, and here's how we overcome it. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the Cadwalader Black and Latino Association Immigration Clinic. So first, before we talk about the clinic, what is the Black and Latino Association?
So the CBLA, because I know that otherwise it's a little bit of a mouthful, The CBLA is our affinity network for Black and Latino attorneys. And, diversity is something that law firms have been struggling with for a long time. And, in that vein, firms like Cadwalader have developed this affinity networks that aim to not only increase the amount of diverse attorneys, but also provide them with a space to voice their concerns, to create events, to create activities, to get to know the other minorities in the firm. And so, since I was a summer associate, I was very involved in the CBLA. And, through there is, the way that I was able to work on the immigration clinic. So, attorneys come and go. So it's always good to have an affinity network that is always reliable and that you can always get to know people there that are going to be willing and interested in, helping out, or vice versa. You could get to a point, where you're helping others out that are just starting out their career. So that's basically the modus operandi of the CBLA. And I find that it's critical that firms have these types of affinity networks. And I think it's been a great source of assistance for myself and my career. So I'm definitely glad that I was able to be part of it.
A number of firms have created affinity networks for a variety of affinity groups. And one of the things that I think makes Cadwalader stand out is having a pro bono clinic that is run and operated by various affinity networks. And it's such a great idea and such a great program that we did a case study about it at our annual conference in March. So tell us a little bit about the immigration clinic.
So the immigration clinic, it's just for long as the CBLA immigration clinic, but it's basically a network of attorneys that are committed to dealing with immigration matters and assisting with immigration matters and assisting our attorneys, that are working on immigration matters. But more importantly, it's a source of training, it's a source of knowledge, and also it's a way to increase the amount of attorneys that are interested in working on these types of matters, and also just teaching others, even if they're not involved with immigration matters, teaching them about what's happening right now in the immigration field. And, there's a lot of ignorance out there right now. There's a lot of misinformation, and, we see it as part of our job to actually spread knowledge and inform others within the firm as to, the current status of, immigration law, et cetera. But really, it's a way for the firm to, consolidate their efforts on the immigration field in order to try to increase the amount of these cases that we take on. So the model for it at the outset was the Women's Leadership Initiative. They have another clinic called the Housing Clinic. And, when I started out as a first year, that was kind of a big thing. And so what I realized after taking on my first pro bono case is that there were a lot of individuals here in the firm that had worked on immigration cases, and they had experience, but there was no real way to know who these individuals were. And so it was just kind of a very makeshift. It's just you had to kind of do it on an ad hoc basis. You had to, be able to know that this person worked on that case and then reach out to them individually. Maybe they weren't there before. So essentially what we try to do is just gather that knowledge and create, this kind of circle of individuals that would be able to assist with respect to whatever matter came up. So let's say that someone is going to, see a particular judge in an immigration court. We, ask around, has anyone dealt with this judge? Does anyone have any experience? Is there any particular way that we can deal with him or her? Or, has anyone dealt with this issue where, let's say, the client is looking to move, but she applied for asylum in this particular, in this particular district, but she's going to move to another district. Things like that where, you kind of try to maximize and tap into the wealth of knowledge that people have accrued and experienced. So, we started discussing it maybe 2 months after I had started at the firm. And, some of the people, that I was talking with were very receptive to it. And they said, well, you should pitch it to Pat Quinn, who is the chairman of the firm, at our next Black and Latino Association meeting. And so, that was, the meeting was the next day. So I basically had to come up with the whole pitch. And, I did. And, the next day I talked with Pat, we were, at the meeting, and I pitched it to him, and, he said, great, how can we help you? And so, from there it just kind of took off. And, every year we have events, every year we have, speakers come in to speak about some, relevant aspects of what's going on. Most recently we had Michael Bohanek from Human Rights Watch, who spoke about, the family separation crisis and how that's still ongoing. Years earlier we had, experts come in to talk about U.S. v. Texas and, the challenges to DACA, et cetera. So, it's just been a lot of different, elements to the clinic, including working with some of our clients in order to, get them involved with our teams. And so, some of their clients, in their legal departments, especially, when they see the news and they see what's happening, they say, how can we help? And so it's a great opportunity for them to be able to participate in these cases, as a joint effort. So it's very multifaceted, and, it's something that, we've been very passionate about, and thankfully it's kind of made immigration part of the DNA of the firm. And, I'm very lucky and I'm very happy that that's been the case.
Do you have any events or any activities of the clinic or the group that are coming up that you want to plug? Yeah, in September, I believe, we're having our annual naturalization clinic with one of our clients. So every year, at least twice a year, we have this naturalization clinic where we help individuals that are already, residents, obtain their citizenship. And those are always great because, I kind of get to see the cases from the very early stages to their culmination. And this is really, the last step. This is the moment where, from very difficult situations, they finally are able to become a citizen in the United States. They're finally going to be able to, swear the oath of allegiance and be able to become voters and be able to have a voice in this country. So I always find it to be very fulfilling to be able to also take part in that, because I'll be perfectly honest, right now, the field of, immigration, or the representation of legal, from documented immigrants right now, it's very tough because of the changes in the administration and because of the constant shifting changes in policy. And so, a lot of the cases that we're working on, it's kind of a very long and arduous process, to see it through to completion. Something like, a U visa petition or a VAWA petition, they're taking about 4 years to resolve. So a lot of the times you don't really get to see the fruits of your labor for a long time. So it's always nice to have, the contrast of someone being able to finally become a U.S. citizen. And so they've already gone through that whole process. So
That's coming up next. And we just kind of, develop this, on an ongoing basis. So there are surely to be more things after that.
Oh, of course. So we have a regular segment on our show called Tell Us About Your First Time. So could you tell us about your first or an early pro bono matter that you handled?
Yeah, so, it was my first assignment here as a first year. I met one of the associates, and he told me, look, we had this client from El Salvador, and, we're having issues. And so it would be great if you could, come on board and, help us out with interpreting and translation, etc. And so I agreed, and, I had not even gotten my first, billable assignment at that point. And, once I met with the client, I realized that, she had gone through, I think, 2 different attorneys by that point, because, the nature of big law is that, there's a lot of rotation a lot of times. And so, you could clearly tell that the client, at the time she was 19. So she was very apprehensive at that point. And she was very wary of the process. And so, I got to know her better. I got to know her mother. She was applying for special immigrant juvenile status, which is a special form of relief for children that have been victims of, abuse, abandonment, and neglect from one or both of their parents. And so I got to know her a lot better. I got to know her a lot more, closer, and got to know her mother, got to know her young child, and little by little she started trusting me. And, eventually the attorneys that I was working with left for another firm, and so now it's just kind of me working with them. And unfortunately, the facts of her case have been very tough. It's the type of case that it feels like you're fighting an uphill battle every single time. And so we're still kind of working through the process, because especially since the change in administration, they've just made it impossible for her. And so, she's sort of become a family member for me. And, it just feels good to be able to be there for her. And, even at the times where she's feeling hopeless, I'm able to give her, some inspiration and invigorate her again. So, she's one of, she's probably my most beloved client, and, she's very, near and dear to my heart. And so, we're still working with her. We're still trying to help her out, because, just the facts have just not been good. But, it's like I tell her, this is still your very best, way to, resolve your situation and, be able to stay here permanently. So that's one that, to me, it doesn't really matter what I do. It's always going to stay with me, because it literally was my first, client, on a pro bono basis.
So how do you stay upbeat? I mean, when the facts are horrible, when the climate is challenging, when the odds seem stacked against you, when it all seems so unfair, how do you keep going? What motivates you, as opposed to throwing up your hands and saying, "Oh, I'm out. This is too depressing."
Hard. And I think that you will hear this from everyone in the pro bono field. The last 3 years have been tough. And, I know that, for example, nowadays when I get a notice from USCIS, I just have to take a minute and just brace myself, because I know that I'm not going to be happy with whatever I'm going to get. And so it does take a lot of mental fortitude, and it does take an emotional toll on you. And, you have to stay upbeat for the client's sake. You have to be honest with them. You have to tell them exactly, what's happening. But you do have an obligation to, make sure that you motivate them, because the worst thing that can happen is the client just kind of losing hope and then disappearing or losing contact. We've certainly had that happen in the past, and that's always a risk, but you want to make sure that the client stays engaged. But, a lot of the times I've gotten something, and, I've just had to take a moment and just, not even deal with it, because, it's just so infuriating. A lot of the things that are happening, a lot of the things that are being done, they're just illegal. There's just no other way to, go about it. They're just, it's very hard as an attorney to abide by the laws and use the rules the way that they're meant to be used, and seeing that the other side is just ignoring those rules just because they can. And, it's kind of like you're playing a game of chess, and, you know that the horse is supposed to, go this way, but then, the other side just, takes it, however they want it. It kind of feels like you're playing chess with someone that's cheating. So it's very hard, and it's very infuriating, because you know in your heart that everything they're saying is wrong, but you can't do anything about it because it's the government. So it's really just the process. I can't really tell you that I'm upbeat all the time. It hasn't been very upbeat the last 2.5 years. Certainly there have been some successes, and those have been very good. For example, with the client that I was just talking about, we recently got a win in the Southern District, and she was part of the class that got the win, and so it felt like we were validated, like you finally got to see some justice. But now the problem is, how will the administration implement it, and how will they follow those orders? Will they follow those orders? So, you learn not to be too optimistic at any point in time, because you know that you're fighting against a foe that doesn't play by the rules. So, and I know that I'm getting very, close to being political here. And I think I'm trying to just speak from the facts, and that has been my experience. It just hasn't, been, very just, at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, it's challenging when we're not only dealing with representing individual clients, but also the rule of law. So it's a lot of challenges, for sure. We talked a little bit about when you were a summer associate and getting to Cadwalader, and it's summer associate season now. What advice do you have for law students and lawyers who are just starting their careers?
I mean, I try to tell, all the summer associates, not just the summer associates, but also first year, second year associates, it's, if you have something that means to you, and if you have something that you're really passionate about, just kind of go for it, kind of, develop it and try to see it through. Because honestly, you're going to be surprised at the amount of support that you may be able to get. And, as part of a law firm, you have access to a lot of resources, and, use those resources, utilize them in order to, make sure that you're achieving the types of things that you want to achieve, and make sure that you always have some sort of balance. Make sure that the firm that you're in puts a high priority on the type of things that matter to you. If that's diversity, if that's pro bono, make sure that the firm is really committed to that. Make sure that it's a good fit. But honestly, it's a matter of being able to fight for the things you care about. I feel like a lot of summer associates and first years, they feel like, well, I'm just here, as a candidate, and this is just one long job interview, so I don't want to mess it up, by putting something out there that is just my personal pet project. I say, don't worry about that. In fact, I think that a lot of people will be very impressed by, the initiative it takes to see this project through to completion. So, now more than ever, law firms are being very receptive and open to new ideas, new projects, and particularly, civic justice, which is something that I'm very happy that's the case, because, law firms tend, in the past have tended to be apolitical, and, they kind of tend not to dip their toes in those waters. But I think it's almost a responsibility for firms to do so. And I'm very happy that firms are more receptive to pro bono nowadays, and they know that in order to keep good candidates, they do need to have a commitment to pro bono. And I think that, summer associates and first years should have that in mind, that that's the type of firm that they should go for, the one that puts a premium and a high priority for the types of, projects that you care about. So if you have something in mind, chase it, see it through to completion, and try to find people that are, similar mentality, and that can help you, kind of see it through to completion.
Well, that's great advice for summer associates, young lawyers, and all of us, really. Let's wind down with this. Who's your pro bono role model? Feel free to pick more than one, and why?
So, I mean, this one's a little bit hard, but, certainly over the last year, there is a partner here. Her name is Ellen Holloman, so she's probably going to be, blushing, now that I'm mentioning her. But, she's, a superstar. She's my role model, because I'm always very amazed at the partners that have a huge caseload, they have a lot of responsibilities, a lot of stress, and still they find time, to work on pro bono and be, civic-minded and make sure that, younger attorneys are getting the type of assistance that they need. And Ellen, in that way, she's just, a model act. She really does everything and goes above and beyond, for pro bono. She messages me every once in a while, look what happened, or look what happened, and, I'm so mad. And so she says, what can we do? What should we do? And she literally tells younger attorneys, look, if you want to take on a pro bono case and you need a partner, just put me on there. I'll happily take it on, without any type of concern for, her billable caseload. And so that, to me, particularly as a woman in a big law firm, as a partner, it really speaks a lot that she's willing to do that. And she's now the head of the Cadwalader Black and Latino Association. And so, ever since she's been involved, we've just been able to do some fantastic things. And, the last event that we had for the immigration clinic with Michael Bohanek, she was the one that made that happen. So, she's just an all-around impressive person. And, that's the type of, attorney that I want to, be, at the partner level, if I get there. So yeah, she's pretty fantastic, and hopefully at some point, you guys are able to meet her.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing her with us. And I think that's such a great lesson to end on. Don't just get mad, get involved, because lawyers can really make a difference. So
yeah, the way I put it is, we're kind of superheroes. We have a superpower, and if you're bothered about the things that are happening, you're the one that is in the best position to do something. So never lose sight of the immense power that you hold. So a lot of injustices are occurring every day, and it's really up to us. Even when times are grim, to just do that little bit, that pushes back. And when you talk about being optimistic, that's really what drives me forward. It's just knowing that in some way, I'm, helping, turn the tide a little bit. And I think that's what others should keep in mind.
What an inspiring note to end on. Thank you so much for talking with me today.
Thank you so much, Rena.
Thank you so much to Osvaldo for making the time to be with us and for all the inspiring work he does. And thanks to producer John and Leah Calabro for her amazing research assistance. You can learn more about the Pro Bono Institute on the web. Find us at probonoinst.org. Hey listeners, we've gotten some great mail from you and we'd love even more. Send your comments, feedback, and suggestions to lawfirm@probonoinst.org. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on the Pro Bono Happy Hour.